Do you remember the last summer before everything changed? Not a specific year, a feeling. Long afternoons that had no agenda, a bicycle leaning against a wall, the knowledge that nobody knew exactly where you were, and nobody needed to. You were a child, and the world trusted children to find their way home before dark. That world is gone now. You watched it leave. And here is what nobody talks about. You didn't just witness that disappearance from a safe distance. You lived through it at the exact wrong moment. Or maybe the exact right one. The moment when who you were still soft enough to absorb everything that followed. If you were born in the late 70s or early 80s, you exist in one of the strangest psychological positions in modern history. You are old enough to carry a complete pre-internet childhood in your memory. Old enough to know what silence actually felt like, what boredom actually felt like, what it meant to make plans you couldn't cancel, because once your friend left the house, there was simply no way to reach them. But you are also young enough to have stepped into the digital world with enough flexibility to learn it, adopt it, build a life inside it. You didn't inherit one world, you inherited two, and were handed no instructions for holding them both. There is a particular kind of memory that only you carry, the memory of transition itself. You remember when the family computer arrived and sat in the living room like a piece of furniture that hadn't quite decided what it was yet. You remember typing things into it with the same careful deliberateness you used to handwrite letters. You remember when email felt like magic, and also slightly unnecessary, because what was wrong with calling? And then something shifted. Not slowly. Not the way textbooks describe technological change as gradual adoption curves and incremental adjustment. For you, it was fast, disorienting, and deeply personal. Because it happened during adolescence, that narrow window when identity is still forming, still asking every experience what it means, still deciding what kind of person you are becoming. The internet didn't arrive after you knew who you were. It arrived while you were still figuring it out. So your sense of self was built across both terrains, partly shaped in the physical world of neighborhood politics, schoolyard hierarchies, and Saturday afternoons with no screen to retreat to, partly shaped in the early digital world of screen names and chat rooms and the strange thrill of being someone slightly different online than you were in person. You became bilingual without choosing to, fluent in presence and fluent in mediation, comfortable with silence and capable of noise. And you carried both languages forward into adulthood, sometimes seamlessly, sometimes with a friction you couldn't quite name. Here is something psychologists rarely say plainly about your generation. You grew up with a self that knew how to be alone. Not lonely, alone. There is a difference that the current world is slowly forgetting. Alone meant a Saturday with no plans and no way to manufacture them instantly. It meant sitting with your own thoughts long enough for them to develop into something. A story, a decision, a quiet understanding of something you hadn't understood before. Your mind wasn't constantly handed input to process. It was allowed, required even, to generate its own. Developmental psychologists call this internal narrative formation, the process by which a child builds a coherent inner life, a sense of continuous self, a relationship with their own imagination. It requires time, and it requires quiet, and it requires the kind of boredom that has no easy exit. You had all of it, and then you grew up, and the world began systematically dismantling every condition that made it possible. The notifications arrived, the always-on culture arrived, the expectation that you would be reachable, responsive, present in the network at nearly all hours arrived. And your nervous system, built in a quieter world, adapted. You adapted. You are good at adapting. But adaptation is not the same as comfort. Somewhere underneath the competence, a part of you is still waiting for the silence to come back, still expects, on some cellular level, that there should be a moment each day when the world stops asking something of you. When you are, briefly, simply yourself, unobserved and undermanned. That expectation is not weakness. It is memory. It is the echo of a childhood that taught you what a human nervous system actually needs, before the market decided that stillness was inefficiency. You were also raised on a particular kind of promise. Study hard, work honestly, build steadily. The future, your parents said in 100 quiet ways, was a place that rewarded effort, a place that would be there when you arrived, roughly as described. You believed this. Why wouldn't you? You had grown up in a decade that seemed to confirm it. Relative stability, expanding opportunity, the sense that the mechanism of progress was sound, and your job was simply to participate in it faithfully. And then the mechanism broke. Not once, multiple times, in sequence, at intervals precisely calibrated, it almost seemed, to interrupt your life at its most critical junctures. The economy stumbled just as you were finding your footing professionally. The towers fell just as you were forming your first independent sense of how the world worked. The financial system fractured just as you were approaching the milestones you'd been told to aim for. Home, family, stability. Each disruption arrived not before you were watching, not after you were settled, but during. And this is the signature psychological experience of your generation, though nobody put it in the headlines. Not dramatic enough for a news cycle, not clean enough for a generational narrative, but real and cumulative and quietly reshaping. You emerged from those ruptures not cynical and not naive, but something more complicated. Hopeful in a way that has been stress-tested. Optimistic beneath a layer of contingency planning. You make plans, but you've already thought about what happens if they fail. You build things, but you've already imagined what comes after if they fall. This isn't pessimism. This is the worldview of someone who watched the promised future arrive late and revised and late again and learned to keep moving anyway. Now look at what you are holding. Parents who are aging in a medical system more complex than anything your grandparents navigated. Children growing up in a digital landscape more dangerous than anything you encountered. A career that required more flexibility and more reinvention than you were originally told to expect. A partnership or a household that requires daily negotiation across the same exhaustion. And yourself. Somewhere in the middle of all of that, still forming in some ways, still asking questions your 20s didn't answer, still carrying that quiet interior life that formed in the analog silence, that voice that needs space to think, that part of you that knows the difference between being connected and being present. Psychologists have a term for the position you occupy in the family structure, the generational sandwich. Obligations running upward and downward simultaneously, with the self compressed between them. It describes the logistics accurately. What it doesn't capture is the particular weight of doing this while also serving as the cultural interpreter for two generations that don't fully understand each other. Explaining to your parents why the world your children inhabit requires new kinds of vigilance. Explaining to your children why some things that feel optional are actually worth protecting. Why boredom is not a problem to be solved. Why being unreachable for an afternoon is not a crisis, but a gift. You are not just parenting. You are translating an entire lost world for people who will never live in it, while also helping them navigate a world you never grew up in. That is a specific and invisible labor, and it matters more than you are probably told. Here is what I want you to hold on to. The qualities your particular history gave you are not accidents of timing. They are adaptive gifts forged in transition. You know how to wait because you once had no choice but to. You know how to sit with uncertainty because your adolescence taught you that the map and the territory do not always match. You know how to read a room because you learned human communication before it was filtered through screens. You know how to hold contradictions because you yourself are one, analog enough to remember what was lost, digital enough to navigate what replaced it. And you carry something increasingly rare, living memory of what human attention felt like before it became a product. Before the architecture of every platform was designed to capture it and hold it and sell it. You remember when your focus belonged entirely to you, when a conversation was just a conversation, when a meal was just a meal, and the person across from you was simply there, not half present in a notification feed somewhere else. That memory is not nostalgia. It is a form of knowledge. In a world that has largely forgotten what it optimized away, the people who remember are not relics, they are reference points. You were born at the hinge. Not quite one thing, not quite another, slightly out of sync with every generation that tries to claim you. Living in the gap between analog and digital, between the world that raised you and the world you're raising your children inside. But here is the thing about hinges. They are the point on which everything turns. Remove them, and two things that should connect cannot. The door stays shut, or swings loose, or falls entirely. The hinge is small, unnoticed, unremarkable, until you understand what would fail without it. That is what you are in this cultural moment. The connective tissue between a world that moved too fast to say goodbye properly, and a world that arrived before anyone was fully ready. You hold the memory of before and the fluency of after, and you pass something essential between them every single day. You are not between generations by accident. You are what continuity looks like when it wears a human face. And the world, whether it knows it yet or not, still needs what you remember.